Hi everyone, my name is Phil and welcome to Phil Does 3D. I'm a multimedia and 3D artist and I stream on Twitch weekdays from 5 PM Pacific Standard Time in the US, 12 PM in Australia and 1 AM in the UK. We've been working on our garden terrace model. We've finished modeling it, texturing it, setting up the materials for it in EonView version 9, and we're going to continue on today with setting up an environment for it in EonView version 2015. So let's open up our file from yesterday. Let's just pull up the render, the quick render we did yesterday. We laid down a basic terrain here with some grass textures on it and put a path in. We're going to continue on with this today. I'm not sure exactly which part I'll tackle just yet, whether I'll do plants in the background or do the hero trees in the foreground. And a hero tree is basically just a high resolution object that's in the foreground of any scene that you're rendering. They just call that generally a hero object or a hero. I'm calling it a hero tree. So I'm thinking of putting two in, one on this side and one on this side. Again, we're doing that because when we're composing our scene here, we always want to make sure that the scene looks balanced. So when we made our model, we made sure it looked balanced. And now when we're starting to set up our 3D environment, we want to make sure that stays balanced as well. But we'll play with that when we start adding more and more objects to the scene. With the path object here, I'll probably, once I get a bit more of the scene set up, I'll probably do something with the path, maybe spread some leaves along it or something, some dead leaves. We'll see how it goes though. Remember guys, if you've got any questions for me or anything you're not sure about, please feel free to pop into chat and ask me. I'm happy to help anyone if I can. I don't know everything, but if I have the answer, I'll surely share it with you. If you want to pop in and say hello, that's always welcome. If you just want to watch, that's completely fine as well. So let's have a look at some plants, I think. Let's look at the background of the scene here, behind the actual terrace or to the sides of it. Now with View, they have browsers for everything. So for your plants, for your atmospheres, for any objects that you load in, it always opens up a browser window. So let's open up our browser here. I have a lot of objects in my browser here, environment, vegetation objects that I've purchased, but View does come with objects as well that you can use. So you probably won't see a lot of what I'm using here because, again, like I said, these are ones that I've purchased separately, but View does come with quite a few that you can play with. So let's have a look. I don't want grasses just at the moment. I'm finished working with the grass objects for the moment anyway. Which trees do Azel Effects have? Now Azel Effects are a company that create a lot of tutorials. They've done tutorials for View, and they've also made objects that you can populate your scenes with for View. Just in case anyone's wondering what Azel Effects is, I'm sure if you search for their name online, you can get all the information you need about that company. Don't know if I really want any trees. I'm going to be using well, it's a crack willow. I'm going to probably be using an oak tree for the hero trees in the foreground, but I'm going to be creating that in Speed Tree. So when we go to do that, I'll show you what I mean. It's just a question of me going through my list here and finding something that I think might look good. If you just hover your mouse over an object here, it'll open up a larger window and it gives you a bit of a description as well if the person that made the object has included a description or not. No, that's not what I want. No, not really. We'll look at these mosses probably a little bit later on when I start setting up the foreground objects here. So I want to probably include some rocks. I want to cover those rocks in some moss, so we'll look at that later. I did want to put some flowers in on the grass itself because I think it needs a bit of colour. These are flower beds, so that's not really what we're after. And again, while I'm looking at my scene here, I'm always trying to judge, think about colour balance as well as composition. So, no, 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 no. Maybe. Let's I'm torn here as to which part of the scene I want to work on next, whether it's the foreground or the background. We're not really putting this in a tropical setting, so I'm not going to use any tropical plants. No. 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 You see I've got quite a selection of plants here, but that's just because I've been using this program for years and years and years, so I gradually build up my library. And once you have them all in place, then generally you'll find something that you can use no matter what the scene is that you're creating. No. No. You know, I do like these Azel Effects objects. I use their stuff quite a bit because they've created some really nice plant models for view. I do tend to stick to using them as much as I can, just simply because they have created, like I said, a lot of really nice stuff. I think we'll concentrate more on the background though at this stage instead of the foreground. We did some foreground work yesterday, so we'll do a bit of background work today, as in plants in the background of the model here. Siberian elm, downy hawthorn, downy juniper, European buckthorn. No, I don't want to use a Japanese maple. Let's load this plant species into the editor and have a look. Okay. Let me just move it up to the side here for a minute. And now I'm looking at my preview render up here in the corner to get an idea of what that plant looks like in the scene. Remember guys, like I've been explaining to you, it's really important housekeeping when you're creating anything, whether it's in Photoshop, in 3D Studio Max, even in Eon View here, and I'm going to address that right now. I'm going to do it with a specific reason in View because it'll make working with the program a lot easier and a lot better. We're starting to work on our plants now, so what I want to do here is start breaking up my my Explorer here, and this just lists everything that's in the scene at the moment. So we have our garden terrace, 2 terrains, a plane, which is I'm using here for the garden path, and the tree we've just loaded in. So this little button down here will allow you to add a layer, and then you can drag any object into that layer. Come on. Usually. Why won't you let me drag you in? There we go. Drag the object on top of the name. Don't try and drag it underneath like I just was. So by putting things in layers, you can more easily work with your scene. So we've put that plant we've just loaded in into a separate layer, its own layer. And with the little eye icon here, we can turn that layer, either lock it so we can't move the object by mistake, or turn it off completely so it's hidden from our scene. And that just helps when you start populating your scene with a lot of different plants. It can get a bit difficult sometimes to see what you're doing or to select the right object. So by turning off the visibility of the layer completely, you can really concentrate on just what you're working on at the time. I'll turn that back on just by hitting the eye icon again. It generally won't affect the preview render here unless you go into your render settings and tell it not to. At the moment, in our render settings, we have it set to render everything. But we can change that here to only active layers, only visible layers. If we turned only visible layers on, when we hit that layer, that tree would disappear from the render preview. And again, that's just an easier way to work with the program when you're populating up your scenes. Now, I'm going to create another layer. And by the way, you can rename these layers as well, which is what I'm going to do, and I suggest you do it too, so as a reminder as to what it is. I'm going to call this one Background Plants. I'm going to call this one Foreground Terrain. I'm going to move my foreground terrain up, and I'm going to start to drag our terrain objects, which are the grass here at the front, into that layer. Now the order that you put them in doesn't really matter. It's not like Photoshop where the ones on the bottom or the ones on the top overlap the ones on the bottom. That doesn't work that way in View, so it doesn't matter of which order you place them in. It won't affect your scene at all. Yeah, that's okay, Sniper Echo. It's good to see you. Your copy run took longer than expected. Hey, I know all about that. I am keeping well, thank you very much. I hope you're keeping well as well. You haven't missed much. I've just been explaining about layers in View and creating a layer for your separate objects so that you can organize your scene a bit better. Just that thing about good housekeeping that I'm always on about whenever you're using any program, whether it's Photoshop or Max. And by putting them in layers, it can really help your workflow, because if, for instance, we've just added a tree here in the background layer. I don't think I'm going to keep this tree, but I put it there to show you guys. I've created a layer called Background Plants. And you create a layer just by hitting that little button down there. Then you just select whatever object you want and drag it over the top of that layer name to put it in that layer. But by using layers, you can either lock that layer so you can't accidentally move the plant once you've placed it, or completely hide it from the viewport, so when you're working you can work in sections and you won't get distracted by the rest of the environment. So it's a really good way to organize yourself when you work. Like I explained though, you will still see the plant in the render viewport, but you can change that by going into your render settings and changing render what to only visible layers, and then that tree would disappear as well whenever you did a render. So just a good organizational tip for you guys. Work in layers because they're really handy and really useful. If you want to bring it back into the viewport here, just turn the eye back on again. So yeah, my suggestion for you guys working in Eon View is to work in layers. It'll help in a few ways actually. It helps with the housekeeping of the scene you're working on. It helps that you can hide the objects when you don't want to work on them. It'll also help when you do a render and you're rendering out to multi-pass or G-buffer, because you can tell it to create alpha maps for specific layers as well. And so it's just another way to help you do your color correction later on in Photoshop or whatever bitmap program you're using. So yeah, try and work in layers as much as you can. It really does help. So we've got a foreground terrain here in its own layer. So we've got the two terrains and my plane. And I don't think you guys saw this yesterday, but that plane is just a plane object here that I put a bitmap texture on, and the bitmap texture is just a garden path that I created in Photoshop. So I just made the bitmap, dropped in a plane object, scaled it to be a bit longer, and then assigned that bitmap to it. That's the only thing that you probably didn't see me do yesterday, because I did that last night. So we have our dirt texture garden path. I'm going to probably add some leaves, dead leaves and things along it, but we'll wait until we get the scene populated up a bit more before I do that. And now I'm deciding whether we're going to work on the hero trees in the foreground or start working a bit more in the background. Let's work with the background a bit more, I think, today, or for the moment anyway. And when I create the hero trees, I'm going to be using speed tree. I'll show you that when we get to that part though. But I don't really like this tree I put in the background. So I'm going to delete it, and again, you just delete it by selecting it, and you hit the delete key on the keyboard or the little trash can icon here. Now, if you want to load an object into that layer that I've just selected, you see the layer is highlighted. Say you want to load an object in and you want it to go into that layer, just make sure your layer is highlighted. Go to your plant browser or load an object up, whichever way you're going to do it. Let's look at the objects. Okay, now the object browser is just like your plant browser. It lists everything on your machine that are objects for view. And remember, this garden terrace is an object now. It's what View calls an object. So it's basically models. View calls models objects, and plants obviously are plants, and atmospheres are atmospheres. But just that bit of a distinction there for you guys. View doesn't call it a mesh. It doesn't call it an it's not like a normal 3D program. It calls it an object, but it's basically any mesh that you import and save out to View's native format, that VOB format. Then it's called an object. Let me see. I do know I've got some plants that I actually made myself, so let's have a look at those. And again, I'm just looking for something I can put in the background there to start populating up the back of that terrace. I actually want to put some plants in those two urns that are at the front of the garden terrace as well. I want to put plants in those, so let's find something nice to put in them. This is a red rose bush with small flowers around the base. I've used that before, it could work. I think I want to go for something a bit more colourful though. And again, these are just plants that I've created outside of View in a 3D program. And then I've imported into View and saved out as a VOB file like we did with the garden terrace here. So they're basically just 3D models that I've imported and converted to VOB format. And then I put them in my on my hard drive in my own library here so that I can easily load them up again in View. I don't really want red because I don't want to confuse the flowers in the urns with the the flowers on the flowering ivy that we've got growing on the model. It's probably another reason I don't really want to use these red rose bushes. Let's have a look at this one. Let's pull this in and pop it in those zones and have a look anyway. And again, I'm loading this into that background plants layer. And you'll see it pop in here in the top viewport. And generally I work a lot in the top viewport because it's easy to place plants when you're working top down than it is to try and work in the camera viewport here. Now View does also have what they call a perspective viewport. We'll get to that a bit later, but I like working in top, side and front because that's very much like 3D Studio Max, and that's the 3D program I like to use, so it reminds me of like working in Max. Not as nice as working in Max, but similar. Let's scale our posies down here, our flowers down a bit. And again, I'm going to pull right in and have a, until I get to where those urns are, which are here, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it. Yep, there. So I'm going to scale it down until they fit, until they look like they'll fit within that urn. Pop it over the top of the urn. Let's jump into the side view here. Now, because we're rendering this model from the front and we're not looking at it from the back, I'm positioning my plant model here as more toward the front of the model. So let's deselect that for a minute and have a look. Now you can see that these parts of the plant are actually going through the actual urn, so we know that I think that the flowers are a bit too small, so we're going to scale it up. And we're also just going to move it slightly so it looks like it's fitting properly on that urn, or in that urn I should say. Again, we've still got a little bit of a problem here, so I'm going to jump into the front viewport here. Again, pull right in. And I'll move my flowers over a little bit. Still got a bit of a problem. Generally you're not going to notice it intersecting the urn like that, but because we're here and we're looking at it, we'll make it fit properly. I'm going to jump back into my top viewport. Almost there. Just need a little bit more. And there we go. We've actually got the these overhanging pieces don't intersect the urn at all, and they look like they're actually flowing over the top of the urn. Right? And all I did to create this flower was I got a couple of different varieties of flowers together. I did this in 3D Studio Max. I put them together in Max in like an arrangement, so the taller flowers in the middle with these bushier ones around the outside, and then I just draped down a couple of low hanging pieces of like vine to create that arrangement. So it's nothing special, it's just a 3D model created in Max using a couple of different plant models. So now that we've got that one in the urn, let's copy it. So I'm going to select those flowers and copy and paste. Now it'll paste the copy directly on top of this one here already. So if you're pasting an object you've copied and you don't see it, it's just because it's always in the same spot as the old one, so just move it out of the way. Again, we'll zoom into where our urn is. Let's move over so we can see this other urn. It's right here. This one's actually being hidden a little bit by the curve of the hill in the foreground. But we know so long as we get it in roughly the right position, it should be good to go. So Again, I'm just going to pull it forward slightly. And we should be good. So, we've placed some flowers in our urns here at the front of that Terrace model. You can just see them in the render viewport here. Sniper Echo says, a bit off topic, but was just wondering, do I have an idea of what you're going to work on next on stream after this project? No, and actually something I've actually been thinking about, because I try and plan ahead a little bit for you guys so that I always know what I'm going to be working on. A couple of ideas. I'm either going to take this model and take it into the Unreal Engine, because like I was explaining to you guys, the process and procedure to take this model into Unreal is completely different from the one I'm showing you to take it into Vue. It's a bit of a different workflow. And I know a few of you guys that watch the stream like to do work with games, like you're into games and you want to, and some of you use the Unreal Engine or you use the Unity engine. So I thought either I'd take this model into Unreal and do some work in Unreal showing you how to take a model like this into that engine, because like I said, the workflow is different than taking it into Vue. Either that or I'd do some more photogrammetry work. I know that a couple of you as well are interested in photogrammetry, so I'm not sure, guys. Let me know which one you prefer to look at. If you want me to show you how I would set this up in Unreal or in a game engine, I'll do that, or I'll do some photogrammetry work and show you how I create things like those angel statues and that type of thing. But for the photogrammetry stuff, I do have to go out and take some photographs and decide what I want to turn into a model. But yeah, so I don't know. It'll either be the Unreal Engine with this model doing that workflow, or maybe some photogrammetry stuff. If we go the photogrammetry route, then I'll probably be creating a new model completely again, like I did with this one from the start. So yeah, it just depends. Depends on what you guys are interested in, what you want to see. Yeah, pretty easy either way. But like I said, if I do have to, if you want to see photogrammetry stuff, I'll have to go out and take some more pics. You like both ideas? Well, cool. Let's see how we go after we've got this one done, because even after we've finished setting up the environment here, I do want to show you guys the color correction in Photoshop as well. So that's another stream on its own, at least one stream. Yeah, we'll see how we go. We'll finish setting this up, and then we'll look at either, like I said, taking this into Unreal and showing you the workflow to do that, or getting some photogrammetry stuff done. And for you guys that aren't sure what photogrammetry is, it's basically you take photographs of something you want to turn into a 3D model. You use a specialist program that will turn those photographs into point clouds. You edit those point clouds in that software. You get that software then to mesh the model and create a basic texture for you. Once you've done that, you export that model, and I usually take it into something like ZBrush to do some polygon correction on, because usually you're never going to get a clean model from photogrammetry on its own. So I'll either do the model correction in Max itself, because if it's nothing too major, or I'll take it into Photoshop to sculpt in some detail if it's missing. Generally I'll take the texture that it creates, because again the texture is never completely right either. I'll take that into Mari and I'll touch that up. And then I take the model into Max and set it up completely. So we can go through that when I do the photogrammetry stuff. But, like I said, I do know a lot of you guys are interested in games and the Unreal Engine and that sort of thing. So, and I do want to sort of point out that like I said, the process to take this model, this Garden Terrace model here, and set it up in Unreal, say, this is the same for any game engine. To set it up as a game model will require some a different workflow, and we'll have to do a little bit of polygon optimization on it as well. It's probably a bit too heavy to take into a game engine as it is. But again, there are tricks you can use when you start working with game models to make game models for your games that will optimize the engine, optimize the objects so you can use it in the engine. Things like instancing, for instance, and texture reuse or texture swapping on the same object are really helpful to reduce your polygon counts or reduce your the memory you're using for your textures. So yeah, it's a bit different. it was interesting when I went to work, because I've worked for a few games studios. I've created some games that are on the market, but with the studio, not just me on my own. The procedure and the process for doing game development is quite different from this process here that I'm showing you, where you don't really worry about polygon counts, you don't really worry about texture sizes, because you're just rendering images out, or you're doing animations. But when you're working in a game engine, yeah, it's a bit, you've got to be a bit more aware of that sort of thing. It's gotten better from when I used to work in games years ago, and I still do contract work for a game studio here where I live, as well as I do contract work for them. I work for an art-viz company doing architectural visualization and a lot of heritage sort of work at the moment, but yeah, the procedures are pretty different. And I'll see how I go. Once we've finished setting this up and we're done with this, these renders and stuff, we'll look at maybe either working in Unreal or doing photogrammetry. Okay, so we have our flowers in our urns. Yeah, I didn't want to go with the red because I didn't want to detract from the reddy colour of the flowers on the flowering ivy. I know there's red here, but most of the plant here is either purple or pink. So as you can see here in the preview render, they stand out quite well. We'll place those in our urns. But now I want to try and populate the background or around the actual terrace itself with some flowering objects as well. So we're still working in our background plants layer here. I'm going to select it to make sure that that's the layer we're going to be working in. And I'm going to load up another plant, I think. Not what I wanted to do. Good time for me to explain the difference here. When you're loading in a plant or an atmosphere, let me just hover that over. You see the pop-up here where if you left click, you will load the last plant that you loaded up automatically. If you right click, you will open up the browser, and that works the same way with the atmospheres and objects as well. Objects are a little different. Right clicking is saving an object, but with the browsers, left clicking will load the last plant species you loaded up. Right clicking will load that browser window so you can select something to load up. Just be aware of that. Otherwise, you'll see what happened when I did that. It just loaded the plant in automatically. I didn't want that. I actually don't want a plant. I think I want to load up. I want to look at my objects again here. Let's see. These I may use for up on top of the terrace. I'll get to that bit later though. These are basically potted plants that are sitting in pots. They may be interesting to place on top of the terrace itself. Give it a bit more colour up there, but we'll look at that later. Like I said, I'm just more interested in populating the around the outside of the terrace at the moment. Again, I may end up using this as well. Now this is, I'm calling it Ivy too, but basically what it is, a lot of dead trees that I've created, and then I've grown, with that plugin I showed you for 3D Studio Max, I've grown ivy all over it. So it's basically just dead tree stumps with ivy completely overgrown it. So it's good to use if you want to populate up sections of your scene here that look a bit empty. It'll help to add a lot of detail and fill up a space. I generally use that type of model for that type of thing. We'll wait until we get the scene a bit more fleshed out before we think about using anything like that though. Rose bushes I tend to use quite a lot because ArchViz, a lot of people like rose bushes when you're doing an outside render for them. Go figure. I mean, I like rose bushes too, don't get me wrong, but palm trees, maybe palms. Let's load in this palm tree and have a look. Alright. I'm just going to pull back a bit here and I'm going to move my palm tree because I don't want it right in the middle of the stairs there. You can see it in the viewport just here. I'm just going to deselect it for a minute so we can get a better idea of what it looks like. Now, the difference between bringing in a 3D model like this I've made outside of View in my 3D program and using View's built-in trees. With View's built-in trees, you can create variations by hitting a button. It'll grow a new shape for you of that tree. You can't do that with stuff, obviously, that you've modeled separately and imported. You can still get around it, though, because if you copy a tree and rotate it, generally you're not going to notice it's a copy anyway, or scale it slightly bigger or smaller. I'm just not sure if I want palm trees in the scene or not. Or this type of palm or not. It may be interesting for the foreground, so let's move it. Let's move it to... Let's maybe put one either side of the stairs here before you actually start to walk up onto the model. Again, I'm going to go into my side view to make sure that I'm positioning it in near the model. You just got to be careful you don't intersect the leaves with the actual model itself. No, I had it right to begin with, I think, around here. Maybe around here. Right where that entrance to the stairs is, I think I'll place one in there. And again, I'm just going to jump here into my front viewport and have a look. I'm going to copy that palm. We're going to paste another copy in. Again, like I said, it places it directly over the old one, so if you can't see it, it's there. It's just right over the top of it. And to make, because we've copied this plant here, rotate it around about 180 degrees. And you guys know this trick from when I was making the garden terrace itself. Just rotate something 180 degrees and people won't know that you've either copied the texture or in this instance copied the actual plant. Okay. Now they look off center here because remember we rotated our model slightly. It's not directly onto us. It's been rotated around a bit. I'm just going to wait for that preview render here to render up a little bit clearer so I can get an idea of what those palms are looking like in the foreground. Right, let's add a couple more plants and then we're going to do a quick preview render like we did yesterday. So again, I'm selecting the layer I want to load them into. I'm going to load in another plant. Again, these aren't View plants, these are plants I've made outside of View in another program. Just I know it can get a bit confusing sometimes between View's native plants and when I say plants and flowers. If you ever see me going into the object browser here, that means it's stuff that didn't come with View or that I've made separately in a 3D program and I'm importing. If I ever go up here, this is native View plants and they can be changed automatically through their plant editor. I'll show you that a bit later on. Let's see here. What's this? No. I know these plants, these flowers here, they render up really quite nicely in the program because I've used them before. You'll find I've used quite a few of these before, that's why they're in my library here, but I know that these do render up quite nicely in the program. Let's load that up. These are like small flowering purple bushes, flowering bushes, and they're really good to fill up a spot. They're a bit big, as you can see here. Are they? Yeah, they're a bit big. Quite big. Let's scale them back a bit. And you can get an idea of scale if you look at your model in the background compared to the plant. And I have an idea of how big this plant should be, as to how much to scale it down or up by. I think around about there. Also, with these viewports, if you double click them, come on, you can go full screen on it or make it larger. It didn't actually go full screen here, but the main camera viewport would. So if you're short of space, you have a bit more room, you can expand your viewports that way by double clicking the title bar. Let's see here. I want to bring these in, I think, to the front, in front of those stairs that we have at the front, on either side. It'll help to frame the stairwell itself by placing objects either side of that entrance to the stairwell. Again, I'm going to zoom in a bit here. I'm going to copy that plant. You don't have to copy just here, you can copy and paste from the viewports as well, and paste it in. Move it over, rotate it around a little bit again so it looks a bit different. Let's deselect it. You'll find I jump between the different viewports, that's so I can get an idea about the positioning of the plant. I do that quite a bit, and I will be doing that quite a bit. Again though, I want to move this plant in a bit because our model has been angled, so it's going to keep it balanced, we have to move it in. And you can see it just a bit here in this viewport on either side of that stairwell entry, underneath of our palm trees here. Let's load up another plant. Again, make sure we're in our background layer here.